Hey guys, my guest tonight, Chris Aubeck, has one of the largest collections of pre-1947 reported UFO cases. And tonight, he's going to share them with us. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? I hope I can hear you guys saying great. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you might have a paranormal issue, whether it's anything having to do with UFOs or anything like that, I'm saying any paranormal issue, we can get to you. It might take us a while because this is a huge state, but we will get to you. We're very thorough at what we do. Best way to contact us is either on Facebook through my personal name, or any of the California Haunts pages. There's several California Haunts pages, but also you can get us on Twitter at Cal Haunts. You can also get us at TikTok at California Haunts, which is all lowercase. You can even get me on Instagram at Ghosty Gal, which is all lowercase. So there's multiple ways to contact us. Today we've got a great guest, and I hope I have his last name correct because you guys know how I am about names. Chris Aubeck is with us, and Aubeck, I think it's Aubeck. I'll have him correct me. But he's with us today, and a lot of the UFO sightings and encounters you hear about happened after like 1942. It goes all the way back to New Mexico and all these different places, where there were sightings. And probably wrong with that too. It's how my day's been today. But the interesting thing of what my guest has done is he has amassed sightings that go beyond that, like way back in time, way back, pre 1940s is the bottom line. And it's fascinating to hear that because obviously this stuff has been going on a lot longer than what we know. I mean, you look at the Bible, and you can read between the lines a little bit with what Ezekiel saw, the big wheel, that big wheel in the sky and things like that. So these things have been coming here, or these sightings have been happening forever, for what we see would be forever. So my guest tonight, Chris Aubeck, is going to be talking about that. And we can talk, and maybe he'll talk about some of those particular more, sightings that stand out to him. But this stuff has been happening for a long, long time, a lot longer than we know. All right. Anyway, I'm going to bring him in. And a quickie, if you like what you see and hear today, please be sure to hit that follow button, especially if you're on Facebook and you're watching this. Please be sure to hit that follow button and the like button. If you're watching from YouTube, if you haven't done so already, there's a little ghost in the bottom right-hand corner. Look at that. I got that just right. See right there. With the magnifying glass and the Sherlock Holmes head on. That's our mascot. If you click on him, that big subscribe button will pop up. And you can subscribe. We've got over 520 videos sitting over there. And I like to do different topics. I just don't like paranormal topics. I will cover different things. I'm a journalist, photojournalist by trade. And so if you hit that button, that'll subscribe you to it. And I think there's something there for everybody, to interest everybody. Okay, well, let me bring Chris in. And this is going to be a phone, an audio-only interview. So I've got some graphics to show you for Chris and all that good stuff. So let me bring him in and let's talk. Hello, sir.
Hi there. Hi. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be talking to you.
Sure, no problem. Tell us about you.
Okay. Well, I've been studying UFOs since I was a young teenager, and it was around the time I moved to Spain. I'm from London originally. In 1991. That I started taking the historical side very seriously because I thought that, well, the only way to find out whether the UFO phenomenon is real, the only way to sort of to know how to distinguish between science fiction and our preconceptions from movies and books and comics and so on would be to go back to a time before any of that existed, to see what our ancestors used to believe in and what they used to report. So when I was a young teenager, what I used to do was to skip school, go to the library, and just sit in the university library, in fact, with a pen and paper and take notes on hundreds of strange cases, sightings, and encounters between people and fairies, people and demons, and all kinds of weird and wonderful phenomena. Then I just compiled as much as I could, and of course that was in a period before anyone had access to the internet. And then many years later, partly with this material, I founded a group called Magonia Exchange. In
Hmm.
fact, in the year 2003, it's still working. And we've got countries, sorry, we have members in 16 different countries. And over the years, we've accumulated about 40,000, 50,000 cases.
Wow.
And in the year 2010, I wrote a book with Jacques Vallée on the topic of UFOs in history, a book called Wonders in the Sky. It did quite well, and at least it made people aware
Mhm.
that the UFO phenomenon is a lot older than we imagined.
So what did you find as you started to look back at this stuff? Because like I mentioned earlier, in the show, that even the Bible, there's this thing with Ezekiel seeing the big wheel. I mean, that obviously had to be something extraterrestrial.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, in fact, speaking about Ezekiel, people have interpreted Ezekiel's encounter with these wheels within wheels,
Hmm.
and what does read like machinery with wings and strange eyes and what have you. People have been interpreting this in a mechanical way since the 19th century. If you look back on aviation pioneers, people who wanted to build the first airplanes and airships, they speculated that maybe Ezekiel had seen some kind of contraption from the sky, some kind of vehicle. And in fact, at the beginning of the 20th century, in the first years of the 20th century, 1906, I believe, a man built an airship based on Ezekiel's sighting, using it as a kind of blueprint. So yeah, I mean, people have been interested in this for a very long time, and of course, the Bible does contain some interesting, sort of tantalizing descriptions of unusual phenomena. So we discussed that, Jacques Vallée and myself, in Wonders in the Sky. And now, after all these years, I'm ready to publish a sort of refresh of that book, which hopefully I'll do in the next couple of months as a complement to the other one that I've just published.
Was it hard to find reports? Because I mean, you're going back so far with it. So
Hmm.
was it a difficult task?
It's incredibly easy. And this is one of the problems, in fact. If you, I mean, when I started the age of, let's say, 15, 16,
Hmm.
I didn't have access to newspapers. I just had books on folklore and sort of very dusty old volumes on a library shelf. These days, if you get a subscription to one of the many historical newspaper web pages, for example, newspapers.com or newspaperarchive.com, which are mainly there for genealogists to look for information about their ancestors. And you just put words in there like strange phenomena, singular phenomena, something seen in the sky, that kind of thing. It's impossible to not find something, to not find an interesting UFO case or strange weather behavior in 10 minutes. And you end up with finding, let's say, 30 items in a single afternoon. And then you're left with the question, what do I do with all of this? Which
Hmm.
is why over the last decade, I've dedicated more time to sorting this out, trying to find out what it really means, and piecing together the lost origins of ufology, which is why I published this book, Alien Artifacts, in November as the first volume to explore the origins of the UFO phenomenon.
And what have you seen? I mean, are the sightings completely different from what people are claiming today, or are they similar?
Well, that's a good question. Partly they can be very, very similar. Uh, we have the same basic shapes seen in the sky, whether that's disks or spheres or triangular objects. People certainly reported seeing all of that. And there were also encounters on the other hand, so that we had, I mean, there were stories similar to abductions, not quite the same. Sometimes people say, why don't we find more abduction stories in
Right.
19th century, 18th century sources? But then we have to remember that most of the abduction stories that we have today come from hypnotic sessions, which would not
Hmm.
have been possible that so long ago. Then again, people's opinion of what all of this meant has changed. So the further you go back, the more supernatural the theories were. It's only around the middle of the 19th century that people began to put two and two together to realize that maybe these were visitors from other planets.
When you talk about supernatural explanations, what are we talking about?
Well, if you go back to the earliest possible records, talking about cuneiform tablets, Mesopotamia, we find lists of omens. They didn't write down dates and places for the sightings. They just said, well, someone saw this at some point, and the idea seemed to be that it coincided with an event, maybe a political event or a war, or maybe a drought or something. So the original ones, the original lists say someone has seen a weird black meteor in the sky that disappeared or stood still, and this clearly means that the king is going to die, or that an army will approach from the west. So those are the earliest ones, going back literally thousands of years. Then after that, even in Greek and Roman times, much of this was interpreted symbolically or as omens of social change, political change. Then you find stories in which demons, witches, ghosts, fairies were blamed for lights in the sky or even at ground level. So yeah, these explanations were quite common, let's say 300-400 years ago. And as I said, it was only around the 19th century when people began speculating that maybe what they saw in the sky actually came from other worlds.
And in doing your research, 'cause obviously you've been doing it for a long time. How were you able to find these incidents?
Mm. Well, if you keep a series of keywords, for example, phenomenon, strange occurrence, disks and balls and spheres in the sky,
Hmm.
and then you put these into a search engine these days, but within a digital library such as newspapers.com, you'll find hundreds of results. But in the old days, I used to sit in libraries, just as Charles Fort used to do when he was compiling his books, the Book of the Damned and so on, and just sit there and take as many notes as possible. It really is very easy to find stories. But of course, we've now collected more than 40,000, so we do find repeats occasionally,
Hmm.
which is fine too, because what we like to do is to get different angles of the same tale, maybe written by different journalists or published at different times.
Now, when you look at these 40,000 that you have, are there any that stand out to you?
Yeah, there are lots which are particularly mysterious. I mean, we can go back to very old times. For example, in the year 776, which was when the Saxons rebelled against Charlemagne in Germany. Um, there's a story about a castle, the castle of Seeburg or Cyberg, which was attacked, and suddenly there were these two flying shields that appeared in the sky. And it's interesting because they say textually they reportedly saw the likeness of two shields, red with flame, wheeling over the church when the heavens when the heathens outside saw this miracle, they were at once thrown into confusion and started fleeing to their camp in terror. And it goes on to say how people were panic stricken when they saw this kind of phenomena in the sky. And of course, what we're talking about is strange objects seen by people who believe that maybe it was God supporting one of the two fighting armies, and people would actually throw themselves onto the ground, kneel down, and pray that these things would go away. So yeah, there are lots of stories like that. Then, if we look at, for example, in the 17th century, there's one that I'm very interested in. We call the Stralsund incident, and it actually says, just to take a fragment of it, after a
Sure.
while, out of the sky came a flat, round form like a plate, looking like the big hat of a man. Its color was that of the darkening moon, and it hovered right over the church of St. Nikolai. There it remained stationary until the evening. And then it goes on to say, which is very interesting, the fishermen, worried to death, didn't want to look further at the spectacle and buried their faces in their hands. On the following days, they fell sick with trembling all over and pain in head and limbs. So what we're looking at there are cases which people were either extremely worried about because nobody could understand what was going on, or like in the second case, it seems that it was related to a sickness that the witnesses experienced, which is not too different from some modern cases where people believe that radiation might be causing that kind of problem. I mean, in my books and in my studies, I can't vouch for the absolute veracity of any of these stories. Who knows what was happening? But it's fascinating to point out these coincidences, these correlations, and see how modern cases parallel ancient ones in that way.
Well, as you were saying, the thing, when you were talking about the one about the battle, I was thinking of the reports coming out of the two world wars. The pilots
Mm.
that had seen these craft, and they all thought that they were weapons of the other side.
Yeah, the Foo Fighters, the famous Foo
Yeah,
Fighters.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there does seem to be a trend in which when there's a war, when there's a battle, when people are under stress, they see unusual things in the sky, or they're more aware of them, perhaps. I can imagine that uh, during ancient battles with armies camped out in the countryside, under the stars, they would be quite paranoid about what would be coming their way, and they'd be looking up quite a lot at the moon, at the stars, maybe hoping God would help them out. And
Mhm.
yeah, there are lots of reports from that kind of situation. I've been compiling some new ones for the next book, in fact, and there were just so many of them that it doesn't seem like a coincidence. You could say that, of course, these are just embellishments from many years later. People saying that of course, the writers wanted to show that God was on the side of the winning team, but on the other hand, it could be that people were just looking up in the sky a lot more at that point.
Do you think that these stories go like we were talking about the Bible? Do you think when you think about that book, Chariots of the Gods, for instance? Do you
Hmm.
think that that's what the Egyptians were depicting on the walls of their pyramids?
Well, I'd like to say so. The thing is, I've always been interested in the ancient astronauts or ancient aliens
Mhm.
theory, and I was a member of the Ancient Astronaut Society, which was founded by a man called Gene Phillips in Illinois, who was Eric von Daniken's lawyer, I believe, in the United States. And he used to send me this bi-monthly newsletter, and it had pictures of Egyptian hieroglyphics in it sometimes, and Mayan and so on. And I became very, very interested in that. Then I started looking into the evidence more carefully, and what I noticed was that although we like to associate the Egyptians with UFOs and things, there's very little relationship between ancient Egypt and any of this. Um, there are only like two, maybe three stories in all of the hieroglyphic texts that I could more or less connect with UFO phenomena. At least one of them is actually just a tale, like a fairy tale, in fact. So I think that people have exaggerated the importance of ancient Egypt in this regard. But it is a subject that interests me very much. Yet another book I'd like to publish this year, if I get time, is going to explore the origins of the ancient astronaut theory. And this is something that most people are really not aware of, but most people will think that it started with this man, Eric von Daniken, who published Chariots of the Gods, I believe in 1968 in German. And then some people will know that there were other authors before him in the 1950s and 60s who speculated on this topic. I have a friend called Walter Raymond Drake who died in 1989, at the age of 80 something. He was a prolific British author on this topic. He published lots of books called Gods and Spacemen in the Ancient East, Gods and Spacemen in the Ancient West, and so on. And he began writing about this in 1964. But what I discovered and what I show in my latest book, Alien Artifacts, is that the theory is much, much older. In fact, the whole ancient astronauts theory comes from the year 1823,
Wow.
which means that this year, 2023 is actually 200 years, the 200th anniversary of the existence of the ancient astronaut theory. It was invented by a man called Francois Chabrier, a Frenchman, who said that he believed that extraterrestrials had come to planet Earth in ancient times when their planet was destroyed, which would have given rise to the asteroids, and that parts of their civilization had fallen onto this planet, and that they were considered gods by our ancestors and so on. And we're talking about, I mean, very, very old times, long before Charles Dickens and so on, right at the beginning of the 19th century. So yeah, it's a very interesting theory, which I hope I've sort of rescued it and rescued its forgotten origins for the book Alien Artifacts.
Well, when you look at history and like we just talked about the Egyptians, is there any ancient civilization that you think maybe saw these things or saw more of these than others?
Well, the thing is, it all depends on how much information we have about that civilization. For example, we have lots of cuneiform tablets, but not many of them mention sightings of any kind. It doesn't mean that they didn't exist. It just
Right.
means that they weren't documented. And of course, we've lost a huge number of books and manuscripts over the years, and there are still things being discovered all the time. I'm sure that cuneiform tablets will be discovered, and in fact, many sit in drawers in the basements of museums that haven't been translated yet, because there are so few people who know how to translate Mesopotamian languages. Then, if you look at ancient Greece, for example, there's no reason at all why they wouldn't have seen a lot of weird things in the sky, whether they were UFOs or not. But again, they didn't keep very careful records with dates and things. So there's very little. So we don't know what they would have seen. There are a few clues here and there, and I've compiled them too into my books. Ancient Egypt, there's very little, but then we're talking about an extremely long-lived civilization. So again, they must have seen things. China, Japan, Asia, they definitely kept records of astronomical sightings, and there are some really curious things in old Chinese texts, which I'd like to publish soon. Then it sort of depends a little bit on that. So because we've lost so many libraries over the centuries, over the millennia, they've been burnt down, or they were robbed, and so on. There's so much information that's being lost, but fortunately, we're beginning to uncover it. The other day, I was reading about a papyrus which hasn't been read or opened, in fact, in about 2,000 years because it would turn to dust, and they're using X-ray technology to be able to read what's inside it without having to open it up. So yeah, there's a lot of room for new discoveries in that regard.
Now, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but to compare the sightings that people had way, way, way back with what's going on today, are the sightings similar?
Yeah, there are very similar ones. Uh, I could actually tell you of one that I was writing about today. In the year 1898, so it's still 49 years before Kenneth Arnold's sighting,
Mhm.
and it was written in a newspaper. It says it was a dream. It was written by a Californian girl, but it's really, really curious, and it just resembles modern sightings so much. So it's about a girl who's walking along along the street. She says, "In my amazement, I looked toward the sky. Instead of seeing a normal blue sky, she saw it was slightly purple, and then she saw a white object rising slowly above the treetops with something black on it. She couldn't be really sure what it was. It looked like an airship of some kind. And then she says that she could see a figure like in black. She thought that was like a pilot who sat in the center of this machine. It circled above her in the air at lightning speed, she said. And then there's a moment in which it sort of suffers some kind of accident and it practically explodes. And then with a bang, it falls to the ground and leaves a kind of spiral. When she approaches this object, she says she found a dead alien, or a dead pilot at least, and she says it was about 3 foot long, or 3 foot tall, and was wrinkled and shriveled. So, although this was published as a dream, we have to remember too that it was very unusual at the time to sort of publish your dreams in newspapers. So the real significance of this story is quite difficult to imagine. So yeah, there's a lot of curious tales of this kind. What do they mean? I'm really not sure, but I think it's important to sort of publish them and allow readers to reach their own conclusions.
Well, that was my next question on this. As far as Roswell goes, if there had been any incidents like Roswell where there have been crashes where they saw bodies.
Well, in the book I've just published, Alien Artifacts, I've got several chapters there which talk about the first ever stories, reports, or whatever about objects that fell from the sky that even had hieroglyphics in them. You have dead alien bodies and so on. So certainly, I mean, there have been several stories like that published over the centuries, very, very similar to Roswell. There's one tale actually which is quite curious that I'm going to publish in my next book, which will be called simply Wonders, and it's from the year 1571. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of it so you
Sure,
can try to imagine what was happening because I personally don't know, but it's quite tantalizing. It
sure.
says. It happened in Prague, and it says, about midnight, there was a great wind over Prague that made such a rumbling noise that it sounded like an earthquake. The people woke up with a start and hurried to their windows. Looking towards the cattle fair, which today is called Charles Square, they saw a marching army coming along the street. The soldiers held their weapons in their hands, and witnesses found their appearance quite unnerving. Behind the soldiers came something resembling a large round chariot drawn by oxen. The object, which made a loud noise because it was scraping along the ground, was apparently made of metal and had no wheels. 8 large human figures marched behind the vehicle. They looked frightful because they had no faces, but they wore enormous spurs on their feet, adding to the noise. Then it says once they crossed the square, there was a great fire that appeared, and then suddenly the chariot, this big round metal object, and all of the people, including these faceless beings, suddenly disappeared. And it says a luminous object could be made out in the air, a circle of fire that persisted until dawn. So that's from 1571. And a very easy interpretation would be that these were soldiers which had captured an object, a round metal chariot that woke people up because they dragged it along the street at night, and they'd also captured some faceless beings. I have no idea what the real meaning of that is, but it's truly 500 years old, that document. So.
Do you think that in some of these reports that you gathered that religion plays plays a hand in how they describe stuff?
Yes, very often. For example, whether people see just a comet or a meteor or a meteorite or whatever, or something stranger, they very often use the church in the town as the reference point. So they'll say it flew over the church, it flew over the cathedral, so everybody knows where it happened. But by doing that, it also gives the impression that there might be a divine connection. Then quite a lot of the time, these stories seem to have a connection with angels, or people wondered whether these had been sent by God in some way. What I do in alien artifacts is show the origins of our belief in aliens, all the way back to ancient Greece, where they started speculating about an inhabited universe, and that sort of carried on till medieval times. Then in the year 1277, it was decided by the hierarchies of the church that it was that maybe God had created a universe full of other lives and other planets, other inhabited planets like our own. So for several hundred years, people started talking, particularly theologians and bishops and so on, about the possibility that God had created other worlds. And they said, well, what does this mean, though? Because if God made other inhabited worlds, did he send his only son to die on all of those planets? Wouldn't that be barbaric? How did this work? Some people thought that maybe Jesus Christ traveled from one planet or even one solar system to the next. Other people thought that maybe he was sacrificed in many different ways. You could even find people's theories that he appeared in different shapes, like tentacle beings or whatever, on different planets. So yeah, religion played a very great part. In fact, in Alien Artifacts, I have 3 chapters talking about Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, and even Jehovah's Witnesses and their original beliefs relating to the cosmos, inhabited planets, our contact with extraterrestrials.
Well, look, like we were just saying, I think religion would have a huge play in all this because you see something you don't understand and you're going to relate it to whatever you know.
Hmm. Yeah,
You
exactly.
know, and that's what happens with these things.
Yeah,
Um,
well, during the spiritualist movement in the 19th century, people used to go to seances and not only trying to talk to their recently departed father and uncle and grandfather, they actually tried to talk to people from other planets. And so there was a lot of stories about mediums who had entered into contact with extraterrestrials that gave them information and so on. I have a whole chapter on that topic in the book too.
When you read these accounts, and maybe some of the ones that are more updated in this day and age, how are you able to kind of read between the lines to kind of sort out the info?
Well, to sort it out is actually quite a difficult task, which is why I've spent about 16 years looking at all of this. What you need to do is to firstly decide whether people were describing a real phenomenon or not, or whether it should go into another category, the category of hoaxes. But even when they were hoaxes, if it was in the 19th century, if they have some similarity to modern cases, it makes you think. It makes you think, well, how is it possible that people 150 years ago, say, came up with, like out of the blue, a story so similar to what you can find today in UFO books or on YouTube? There must be something there. There must be some kind of connection, whether it's real, whether it's psychological. So you need to make comparisons in that sense. I think that the important thing about UFOs and UFO history is that it shows us a lot about humanity and our relationship with ourselves, with nature, and the universe, because it's like a never-ending search for proof that we are not alone and that other beings try to communicate with us. Because of course, if they try to communicate with us, it makes us feel more special. So when I look at all of this information, I'm sort of taking into account a lot of different factors. And in the end, I just think everything is relevant. Everything is important. There's always something to say about these stories.
Have you ever seen one?
Yes, I did. On the 6th of April, 1996, in Spain, I was with about 6 other people, maybe 7, in a park in a small village called Talarrubias in an area that's not too far from where I'm living now. And we saw a rectangular orange light in the sky. It wasn't moving. It was just stationary, and it was there for about 5 minutes, 7 minutes. We were pointing at it and talking about it, and then suddenly it went out as a light bulb would go out, and then it appeared in another part of the sky, which was really odd. And it was just there. I don't think it was a reflection of anything. We're talking about 1996. It couldn't have been a drone. This is a little village in the middle of nowhere. I doubt very much it was some experimental craft, and it wouldn't explain what we saw anyway. So I don't know what it was, but yeah, that puts me in the category of UFO witness.
In looking at all these cases that you've amassed and done research on, has there been one that shocked you at all?
Well, there are stories that have shocked me very much. So some of them for reasons which you probably wouldn't imagine. For example, I've got a collection of stories about how people at the beginning of the 20th century, that's 50 years before flying saucers, believed that they had some kind of telepathic communication with Martians or with aliens of some kind, and they did things according to what they thought were the wishes of these beings. There's one case, I believe it's from 1903 or 1910. I have to look it up. The police in America came upon a man who was standing in the middle of a stream, and he had his mother's shawl in his hand, and they said, "What's going on?" And he had some blood on him too. And this guy said, "Oh, well, I've just killed my mother with a broken bottle."
Yikes.
And they go back with him to this guy's house, and there's the mother in her late 60s, early 70s, with her body totally ripped open. and a broken bottle on the floor. And the neighbors actually said that they'd heard the screams and so on. And his story was that for some time he'd been hearing telepathic messages from aliens in airships that were floating over the house. And they said to him that if he ever wanted to get to Mars or wherever it was, he'd have to go there with his mother, but she couldn't carry the fetus that she had inside him. So could he please remove it? And of course, I mean, the mother was way too old to have been pregnant. But yeah, he slashed his mother in two, basically, and then of course he was arrested and put in a mental hospital. And that's not the only case I have of this kind. I have other stories of. There's another one from, I believe it's from about 10 years before that. A mother, it's just a perfectly normal family. The father arrives one day after work and sees his wife and three children all dead, lying on the floor in the living room. And their mother had just killed them and then killed herself. And the reason was, I believe it was in a note that she left behind, was that she spent some time watching a light in the sky, and she thought that it was some kind of enemy that was coming to get them. So she thought that she'd better take her life and her children's life, and sort of sort of end it all in her own way. There are lots of stories like that, which are pretty shocking and have a lot to do with extraterrestrials, or at least extraterrestrial beliefs.
It just amazes me that somewhere that there's a written record of this stuff. It goes back really far.
Oh, it goes back very, very far. There was a time when I wondered how I could find out what just normal people, the man in the street, thought about this kind of thing. Because of course, most people who left a written record in books or scientific reports were scientists and scholars. They didn't write their craziest and wildest thoughts down. They would normally sort of present very academic theses about life on other planets and so on. But then what I realized was, if you focus on the medical cases of the time, people who were arrested because they were allegedly insane. I mean, to be thought insane, you just had to say that you were being chased by a witch or a goblin, or that you'd seen extraterrestrials in your bathroom or whatever. And then if you look at those cases, you find plenty of stories of people who told doctors that they'd seen very weird phenomena and very weird creatures. But at the same time, newspapers in the 19th century loved to publish strange stories. So from around 1848 on, there were plenty of stories of artificially constructed objects that fell from the sky, sometimes covered in hieroglyphics, sometimes parts of machines, and occasionally even like the bust of a human being, and like a statue. And newspapers loved it because there was a lot of competition in the 19th century to sell local newspapers. There were so many of them that people just lapped it up. We've just collectively forgotten that there was a time in the past when people spoke probably even more about UFOs and aliens than they do today.
Interesting. The other question I have too is looking at all the research you've done. When you write these books and whatnot, is it hard to figure out, what you should put in the book as opposed to what you should leave out of these books?
Yeah, we when I compiled the book Wonders in the Sky with Jacques Vallée in 2010, we spent about 3 years going through literally hundreds, thousands of stories, accounts, and UFO cases to decide which ones to put in the book. We discovered that 70% of what we had was fake. There were hoaxes and so on. Then you're left with 30%, and then you have to decide whether each case has a named witness, a location, a date. So if you concentrate on cases with dates, names, and so on, then that's one way of doing it. In the next version of Wonders in the Sky, which I'm going to bring out in a few months, it'll have a different name for copyright reasons, because the other one's still available. It'll be a total redo of that book anyway. Uh, there are many. I'm going to put many new cases in there and throw out other ones which 13 years ago we thought were real, and now we know we're not. So it's something that's constantly changing. So I have this massive collection, a mountain of stories, and as you go through them, some of them turn out to be real, some of them turn out not to be real, or just just misidentifications. Or then over the last 13 years, so much new information has come to light that I can add cases, take other ones out. Yeah, it's just constantly changing.
And that brings me to this question too. How can you tell if something's real and not real? Like a
You
hoax.
can't.
Okay.
You absolutely cannot tell. The only way that you can, if it's something extremely spectacular, you can
Hmm.
find individual reports in different locations. So people in several different villages or towns can say they saw the same thing in the sky. Um, then there are cases, for example, there's a series of stories about one large central light and 8 or 9 smaller, like satellite lights that sort of
Hmm.
circle it, which appear in so many different reports at different times, different countries, that I'd be very surprised if that wasn't real. Then a few years ago, a friend of mine, Martin Schoff, and I, who he wrote a book with me called Return to Magonia. We sort of put together stories of what seem to be like luminous bubbles or luminous sort of circular objects that have been seen over the centuries.
Hmm.
And there are so many cases of that kind that it's very, very unlikely that they are made up. So
Hmm.
although there's no way of determining whether something is real or not, I mean, we can have a very strong suspicion.
Hmm. Hmm. And when you're doing this, like you say, you use like newspaper clippings or different online newspaper sources. Do you also go to libraries and really delve into the books there to look this stuff up too?
Yeah, I've invested a lot of money over the years in books, of course, and in many different languages. Before Google Translate, DeepL, and other programs, and now ChatGPT existed, I used to buy books and ask people to help me translate them, whether it was from Danish or German or whatever, and even Japanese and Chinese because a lot of the information in the world isn't available yet. Or if you go into Google Books, for example, and you try to get access to a book, quite a lot of the time you only see a fragment, and you can't get the whole book. So you need to find a way to access this material offline. So sometimes I've bought books from eBay. I've spent a lot of money over the years, but I try not to think about that.
I can understand. I can understand. What do you say to people that want to that want to conduct similar research to yours?
Well, first thing I say to them is that it's extremely easy to get the cases, to find something new. They've only got to use any one of the 150 historical newspaper archives online. Some of them for some of them there's a paid subscription. Some of them have a trial period that they can use and then cancel before they get charged. And a lot of them are completely free. If they go onto Wikipedia, they can just put historical newspapers, and it'll give you a whole list of them. Um, it's very easy to get the cases themselves. The difficult thing is to have a perspective of what they mean and where they fit into the general picture. For that, you really need to pick up a book like the one I just published, Alien Artifacts, or the one I did 13 years ago, Wonders in the Sky, or the next one that I'm going to do. Basically, because I mean, I just mentioned my own books, not because I particularly want to sell these, but because there's nobody else doing this. It's very difficult to find books on historical cases because very few people pay much attention to that. There's a lot of there are a lot of books about modern ones, modern cases, and abductees and contactees and so on. Very few that put together a sort of a complete picture of what our ancestors used to believe. And to me, I think that's the most important part. If we don't know what cases came before the ones that we see today, we're not really prepared to judge whether modern cases are unique or whether maybe they're just the survival of very old traditions, maybe urgent legends. So yeah, I think that's it. And then apart from that, they could all people interested in doing this could always join my research group, Magonia Exchange, which they can Google, or I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and all the usual places.
So what's next for you?
Well, this year I want to publish a lot of what I've been working on. I have one about beings, creatures which seem to be balls of fire, which travel around as balls of fire and then become humanoid and so on. I have a collection of those which I'd like to publish in the next few months. Because Alien Artifacts, which is available on Amazon now, is just volume one of a series, which is going to be 3 books, which is going to be the most complete look at historical UFOs or ufology and the belief in extraterrestrials that's ever been made. I want to make the next part, volume 2, by let's say April, May, and also the second part to the original book I published with Jacques Vallée 13 years ago. I'm going to redo that book, make a very original and slightly different take on historical cases. Then after that, I have just so many. I'm also working on a parallel project about supernatural art, because there are a lot of interesting stories about weird pictures, images that have appeared in unusual places, on walls and ceilings and floors. Not simply like a potato that looks slightly like a head, but actual pictures. And I'm going to compile those into a book and call that probably Supernatural Art, and get that out this year. I have so many projects. I don't know where I'm going to find the time.
Question I usually ask everybody is, let's imagine a second where you're standing on the strip in Vegas and you got a shop with all your books, and there's other guys that have similar books as well. How do you get people to come in to read your books?
Well, I think that the what distinguishes mine from others simply is that I show people exactly where I get the information from, and show people how they can get exactly the same information by themselves. I'm very transparent in what I find. If I see something strange, shady, dodgy about a story, I tell the reader immediately. I warn them. I'm very transparent. I'm not trying to sell anything. I don't have any theories I want to sell. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I want the reader to reach their own conclusion. I'll guide them a little bit, but I think that this kind of field, the field of paranormal research, UFO research, this is very much something that the individual has to reach their own conclusions about, because it's very unlikely that in our lifetimes we're going to find definite answers, because people have been saying that the answer is just around the corner for the last 200 years. Right. So I just think each person has to reach their own conclusion, and I just give them the straight facts, wherever that leads. And I'm proud of that because it means I'm not leading anybody on.
And how can people find you, sir?
Well, at the back of my book, Alien Artifacts, is my email address. I believe my email address is also at the back of Wonders in the Sky. If they look for me on Twitter, they can find me, Chris Aubeck, Aubeck, or Facebook, or Instagram, or whatever. I mean, I'm sort of all over the place, so it's pretty easy to find me.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. This was absolutely fascinating.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
We'd love to get you on with, in the future, actually, to talk more, because this is great.
Well, once the next one comes out, I'll let you know, and we can talk about it. Yeah.
All right, sir. Well, thank you so much, and have a good rest of your evening. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, bye. Okay, guys, that was Chris Aubeck, and wow, that was a lot to take in, a lot of information, great research he's done, fantastic. Tomorrow I'll be back, same time as always, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with a brand new guest, and we just keep this train rolling, right? We just keep this train rolling. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and listening, and especially Chris. And let me get this good. And you can find me at California Haunts on Facebook, and just Google California Haunts. All this stuff will pop up, just like Ghosty Gal over at Instagram with all lowercase. TikTok, we're talking California Haunts. That's all lowercase. YouTube, it's youtube.com/ampersand California Haunts Radio. All our videos are over there, and our website, CaliforniaHauntsRadio.com, is also available, and that's got a lot of archival stuff in that goes way back to our Blog Talk Radio days. So I think you can find us just about anywhere when you Google, even Meetup, right? But anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. In the meantime, I'm going to shoot you his information along with the books that he has out, and then I'm going to say goodbye. So here we go. I'm going to shoot the information over to you. Websites: Magoniax.blogspot.com and twitter.com, C. Aubeck. And of course, Return to Magonia is one of the books. And you've got Alien Artifacts, Wonders in the Sky. And of course, that can all be obtained at Amazon.com. And I thank you guys for coming, and I will see you tomorrow, 6:30. Have a great evening.